Aloha, friends. Welcome to part 3 of our series, Being in the Way. This is an exploration of the most famous sermon ever preached, Prot, the Sermon on the Mount. And this one is called Non-Resistance, or Freedom Refuses to Fracture. Here's the key text. It's Matthew 5. Jesus said, "You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, just hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, just go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven, who causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." Today's teaching is essentially a follow-up. It's like part 2 of last week's concept. Last week's concept was the single eye, or unified vision. A framework, a way of viewing and experiencing the world as one thing, like that there's only this one thing happening, and that actually everything belongs. And Jesus said when our sight is divided, that our body is heavy, but when our sight is unified or healed or single, that our whole body will be full of light, that our experience of reality won't be so heavy and bogged down. And when we look into what it is that quietly exhausts the soul, oftentimes it's a few sort of unconscious processes that are in need of examination. And those processes are the way that the mind, it's what neuroscience calls semantic neighborhoods, which is basically this unconscious function of the mind to take input, stimulus, experience, and then quickly file it away into categories of experience so that we can, continue to exist in this world of constant stimulation. Thank God for this function. Because otherwise, what do they call it? Analysis paralysis. There's just simply too many tiny decisions to make without these shortcuts. But the downside of this, when this process goes unchecked and uninvestigated, is that, I guess the easiest way to say it is the word category that we have in English comes from a Greek word, kategoria, so it's virtually unchanged. And kategoria in the Greek means accusation. So our English word category comes from a Greek word that direct translates to accusation. And that is the downside of these semantic neighborhoods, is that there's as much prejudice and bias going on in here as there is going on out there. The constant rendering of judgment that's happening is quietly exhausting if you just tune into that channel. And so unified sight, the single eye, is seeing in a way that acknowledges that everything belongs, and that we ourselves belong, and that we're allowed to simply just be. Unified sight, the single eye, allows the world around us, the people, places, and things that we interact with, to simply be what they are without us immediately rushing towards some sort of value verdict. Jesus says essentially that unified sight brings lightness to being. And so today's teaching will be focused on a little bit of a follow-up question to that, which is essentially, well, what happens when reality doesn't cooperate? Finding inner peace in solitude is quite honestly complicated enough, but what happens in you when you come down off the mountain and are immediately faced with some relational crisis. Somebody completely misunderstands your intentions or outright dismisses your experience, offers you some form of constructive criticism or uh, non constructive criticism. What happens then? Well, if you're anything like me, the nervous system spikes. And suddenly, what Jesus called the kingdom, this place of inner congruence and harmony, peace, silence, quiet, all but evaporates. Or it feels like it evaporates, but that isn't actually what happens. What really happens is the peace that we just patiently excavated by allowing the nervous system to calm to a point that we could access it. That peace just gets clouded by a whole storm of strong feelings and emotions. It doesn't go anywhere, it can't go anywhere, but it can be hidden from our view. So relationships tend to create sort of intense internal weather. and and this can actually be helpful information if we let it be, because relationships are one of life's most reliable methods of revealing where our freedom is still fragile. For most of us, our relationships and our interactions with strangers and acquaintances and maybe even good friends don't present an immediate threat to our peace. But what about relationships with those closer to us? What about the relationships with our family? Or, as Jesus brings up in this verse, our relationships and our interactions with our enemies? I'd wager that you've probably lived long enough at this point to notice your innate ability to access near saint level patience with a stranger or a friend in need, and then go home and somehow act like an emotional terrorist in your own kitchen. You know that thing where you really save the best parts of you for the people you love the most. All family relationships are tricky. A counselor friend of mine used to say that nobody knows how to push your buttons like your family because they're the ones that installed the buttons. Jesus himself experienced this, you know. He rode into Nazareth a couple of years into his life in public ministry after having amassed a pretty large following and a sterling reputation. He rolls back into Nazareth with his posse, and instead of rolling out the red carpet, the folks in the small town where he grew up say, "Well, this is." Yeah, I mean, something like that. They're like, "Isn't this just the carpenter's kid? Like, we know this guy." And I'm sure you've had this experience too, you know? It's, for whatever reason, the people that we're closest with oftentimes have the most difficult time seeing and acknowledging that, like, we've changed. I'm not the same person that I was. As Ram Dass famously said, if you think you're so enlightened, go and spend a week at your parents' house. We can get mad that there are buttons, and we can get upset at the folks who are pressing them. And then we can look a little bit deeper into it and become upset that anyone ever installed them in the first place. Or we can just accept reality for what it is and use the emotional reactions as helpful information. Because all they're revealing is the places where our freedom is still fragile. There's an old Desert Fathers story that goes like this. A brother came to see Abba Macarius the Egyptian, and he said to him, "Abba, give me a word that I might be saved." So the old man said to him, "Go to the cemetery and heap abuse upon the dead there." So the brother went to the cemetery and insulted those who were buried there. He threw stones at their graves, and then he returned and he told the old man about it. The master said to him, "Did they say anything to you?" The brother replied, "No." The old man said, "Go back tomorrow and praise them." So the brother went back, and this time he praised the dead. called them apostles, saints, righteous men. He returned to the old man and he said to him, I have complimented the dead. And the old man said to him, Did they answer you? The brother shook his head no. Then Abba Macarius said to him, When you insulted them, they did not reply, and when you praised them, they didn't speak. You too must become like a dead man, if you wish to be saved. Like the dead, take no account of either the scorn of men or their praises. Then you'll be free. We could say that freedom isn't the absence of feelings. Freedom is the space between them. 'Cause as long as praise can lift me and insults can deflate me, then my freedom is contingent on the whims of others. And I'm stuck again in an all too familiar pattern. You probably know this one. It goes a little like this. External provocation triggers an emotional response. There is sudden fusion with this present emotion. And there is some sort of retaliatory comment or rumination and repeat. And my one wild life becomes little more than a series of increasingly predictable reactions. And honestly, this is exactly what Jesus is getting at with this turn the other cheek business. Now, I don't know how you grew up hearing this verse or thinking about this concept. On the surface, it reads like a docile acquiescence to an abusive situation, right? I mean, that's kind of on the face. It just seems like Jesus is saying, I'll just to be the world's doormat. And I've tried this, okay? I have tested this out. I have indeed, on a number of occasions, allowed myself to be the world's doormat. And when I walked away from any of those experiences, it was never triumphantly. I never felt like I was finally successfully obeying Jesus' commands or applying a Bible verse that I had memorized. I felt gross. That's because that isn't at all what Jesus is talking about here. Because when we read this verse in its proper cultural context, we see that what he is describing is actually a subversive power move, arriving from a place of profound inner freedom. Let me explain. So Jesus was a Jew. He lived in a charged political moment. His people had been made subject to the Roman Empire, and they were actively watching their entire culture and way of being be dismantled by an oppressive foreign power. It was legal at that time under Roman law for a Roman soldier to demand that a subordinate member of an occupied nation carry his heavy pack for up to the distance of 1 mile, but no further. That's what the law stated. The law of the day also stated that if, I get myself into trouble, I owe somebody money, I can't pay him back, it's legal for that person to sue me for my tunic, for my undergarment, for my t-shirt. I could be sued for that. That could be taken from me. But the cloak, the outer garment, what would insulate you at night and keep you warm, was essential for living and therefore could not be taken. So when Jesus suggests that if anyone asks you to go 1 mile with them, just go ahead and go 2 miles. Or if somebody sues you for your tunic, go ahead and throw your coat in as well. He's effectively saying, don't lose your freedom in reactive protest. Instead, graciously force the injustice into the light. Put the soldier in the uncomfortable position of having to decide out there in front of everybody just how far he's willing to exploit another human being. Be so generous as to help them break their own law. This is trickster wisdom. It was legal in that day for a soldier to backhand slap a member of an occupied nation for insubordination. And that slap served as a public reminder that you are beneath me, you are second class, you're subhuman. And this is why Matthew specifically recorded which cheek. And that's actually why I came to learn any of this stuff that I'm sharing right now, is I thought it was interesting that a specific cheek was mentioned. But what Matthew says is if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, which is where a backhanded slap from a right-handed Roman soldier would land. He says, turn to them the other cheek also, essentially saying, don't submit to this dehumanizing system. Just square up and essentially invite the soldier to treat you like an equal. Because if you square up and don't cower, you don't lose your freedom in retreat, and you don't lose your freedom in retaliation. You put the soldier in the uncomfortable position of deciding whether he was going to fight you as an equal. And a funny little legal wrinkle about that, for a soldier to square up and to strike someone with their dominant hand, that was only legally permitted between members of the same class. So it would be breaking the law. So to turn the other cheek is to stand up and demonstrate that you are their equal. So to turn the other cheek is to take a stand and to make a spectacle of the ridiculous rules that society invents to divide people into classes and to rank us along some continuum of value. It's a bid to wake up the dormant consciousness of the abuser. Is it risky? Yeah, it's exactly risky. It's also possibly the only way off of the vengeance cycle that threatens to consume the earth and all of its resources and wipe out humanity as we know it. Like, look at where we are. And just a brief glance through recent history, and we see that actually applying this wisdom has changed the world. Gandhi read the Sermon on the Mount, and he realized that violence survives on division. If there's no division, there's no violence. As long as I continue to view the world as, good people and bad people, then no matter the outcome of the struggle, whether it's win, lose, or draw, it's nearly impossible to avoid just becoming what I oppose. Like, I remember a few years back after the leadership transition, and Jess and I were, had become the new supreme leaders of Beaches Vineyard Church. And there was like this little sentiment that I picked up a few times of like, the hippies won. All right, good. The hippies they've won the revolution in our little community. And I remember somebody saying, I like the direction that the community is taking right now because I only hang out with open-minded people. I thought, well, yeah, okay. You see, it's nearly impossible to avoid becoming what we oppose until we access the kind of seeing that where Jesus operated from. This unified sight that refuses to divide, the freedom that won't be fractured. So Gandhi recognized that the struggle was never against the person. It was against the pattern of blindness. And Dr. King saw this the same way. He said the movement must never seek the defeat or the humiliation of the white man. Defeat and humiliation aren't the goal. Understanding and friendship is the goal. He said, this is strong medicine, painful to think about, but he insisted, we will match your capacity to inflict suffering with our capacity to endure suffering. Not to prove moral superiority, but to expose a shared humanity beneath the fear. He warned his followers, if we become bitter, then we've already lost the freedom that we seek. Because hatred divides the soul long before it divides the society. The single eye, unified sight allows us to look at someone who's harming us and still see a being, a person, larger than their actions. But it begins with the uneasy job of accurate self-perception. This is what St. Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians. He said, examine yourself. Take a long and honest look at what you think you believe about who you think that you are. Do not look away until you see the face of Christ reflected back to you. He's like, if you need a test, wondering if you're saved or not saved, he said, here's the test. Don't look away. Christ said something similar when he said, "You must love your neighbor as yourself." And as Cynthia Bougeot pointed out to me some time back, we sort of instinctively, unconsciously add an "as much as" to the statement. Love your neighbor as much as you love yourself, but that's not what it says. It says, love your neighbor as yourself, as an extension of your own being, because that's who they are. Most simply said, unified sight refuses to cooperate with the illusion of separate worth. And when one side refuses to be reduced to a category like enemy, conflict loses its juice. It just does. And this happens. It's challenging to think about it globally. It is. But when we think about it personally, we see the truth of it pretty quickly. Like, I watched Jess evolve from my wife, from who she was to who she is and to who it is that she's becoming. And along this evolution, like she and I, we had a lot of passion in our relationship. A lot of passion has led to a fair degree of conflict over the years. And we used to really get into some pretty big fights, and then we'd really get into some pretty big making up. And, that would go on like that for quite some time. And then suddenly, as she began to take her spiritual life much more seriously and in a way that was honest and true to her instead of a put on kind of performance thing, I watched she's gotten bigger on the inside. And somewhere along the way, a new pattern began to emerge, and it would be, like for me, external provocation. I would feel wronged or slighted or misunderstood in some way. I would do the natural thing, which was engage in fight, confrontation. Generally, she, being of a Italian background with her beautiful fiery red hair, would normally ratchet it up, and then we get into a good old fight and have to spend weeks trying to undo the damage that we did with our words while we were too hot. And what changed was the external provocation would come to me. I feel misunderstood. I go to initiate the fight programming, and then she just wouldn't respond. She wouldn't walk away. She wouldn't storm away. She wouldn't close the door. She would just kind of look at me and wait. And what happened is that she just suddenly became a mirror, and I could see myself looking like an angry chimpanzee stomping around the house, like a bushwhacker or something, and just honestly looking ridiculous. And then I would stop with that energy and recalibrate. And then we started to have like constructive conversations. I don't know if this is like what premarital counseling was supposed to teach us or something, but we're experiential learners, and it took quite a while to get here. But when one side refuses to be enemies, conflict loses its juice. Unified sight might be painful and costly, but it is sanity in a world gone mad. I'm just going to close with one of my favorite pieces of art. It's called Christ Before Pilate, and it's a picture of the world gone mad with power. Everyone pointing fingers, raising voices, deep in contemplation, determining, judging, rationalizing, reasoning. There's a very obvious seat of power and a lot of energy and anger spinning out and around Christ at the center, who seems to me still and poised. Now, he's the one who's on trial. He's the one who has no objective power in this situation, and yet he is the only one in control. And I took a famous scripture from the 10th chapter of John's Gospel and reworked it using the original language, and I landed here, and I'm going to close with this. Christ said, "My life is my own. It can be given, but not taken. I choose where to lay it down. I choose when to pick it up. Nothing, not you, not even death, possesses me, because my life is my own." And that is the freedom of unified sight. Awareness may not bring immediate mastery, but awareness restores the capacity for choice. And that's the movement from reacting to responding. All right. I think that's a wrap. It got dark out here, didn't it? Thank you for being here, for being you. Love you guys. See you around.